Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Animal agriculture is vital to Nebraska. Livestock production not only contributes to our food supply, but also helps our rural communities. Livestock provides revenue for schools, creates jobs, supports Main Street, and enhances the future for farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Board's Animal Agriculture Initiative works to encourage growth of responsible livestock enterprises to benefit agriculture and Nebraska.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We're reporting this week from the 23rd Range Beef Cow Symposium, held this year in Rapid City, South Dakota. We were reminded how lovely it is here this time of year when wind chills dipped into double-digit negative numbers Tuesday and Wednesday. On this episode of Market Journal, Jim Robb looks ahead at profit margins in the cattle industry in 2014. John Meuret analyzes corn and soybean markets ahead of the December crop report, and Rick Funston discusses winter nutrition in cattle. On our way here, we traveled through Chadron to talk with Scott Cotton about how that area of Nebraska has been recovering from a devastating snowstorm in early October. We'll show you that interview towards the end of the show. Jim Robb from the Livestock Marketing Information Center joined us Tuesday morning to discuss cattle markets. While this event focuses more on cow-calf production than the feedlot sector, we spent time in both during our conversation with Jim. After a rough stretch with drought effects forcing feed prices higher, I asked Jim if he felt cattle producers were through the worst of it and on the way to average or even above average conditions.
Well, it sure feels like it, and Mother Nature's always hard to call here, but from an economic standpoint, we've come through some very high-cost environment for both feedlots and cow-calf operations. Certainly, the cost of grain as feedstuffs in the next year or so will be lower. The ethanol industry has sort of changed. It's not as quite the force-moving prices that it was, and we're looking at more production. So costs of production will be down. But on the feedlot side, that has come simultaneously with the bidding up of feeder cattle prices, which has been good for cow-calf operations, but it's already started to put some pressure on feedlot returns, even though they're in the black right now. Yeah,
go a little deeper here and ask you to contrast what you see in returns for cow-calf producers and for feedlot producers here as we enter 2014.
As we enter 2014, I think cattle feeding is increasingly moves to a break-even proposition. Feeder cattle prices have been up, and cow-calf returns should post strong year-to-year gains for two factors. Prices will be higher, and cost of production will be down. So for the cow-calf sector, I think 2014 really does set the stage to start growing the cow herd because of increased profitability.
Cow prices on many levels have been extremely high recently. Can that continue, and will it continue?
Well, I don't think we'll get as rapid of increases in calf and yearling prices as we've had in the last 6 or 9 weeks. But on a year-to-year basis, we'll have strong increases in calf and yearling prices. If we get a normal corn crop in 2014, we'll see year-to-year increases probably in calf prices fourth quarter of 14 versus the fourth quarter of 2013. So still some strength ahead, given tight feeder cattle supplies and pretty good growth in the U.S. economy and still strong export markets.
I want to ask you about the economy and demand in a second, but first let's touch on corn prices. When we talked in Goodmanson earlier this summer, you had said that corn prices you thought would be in that $4 range, which is where they've stayed. Now that we see a lot of corn on the ground around this area, do you think there's a chance that they dip below $4 at all?
They could. It's certainly in some regional cash markets. We've already seen that in Minneapolis and some of the Midwestern markets on a cash basis. But it looks like we're getting very close to trying to set the floor, at least for the near term in the corn market, but still at levels that are well down below a year ago. We're not going to bounce up prices very quickly. We may get a little bit of seasonal strength in corn prices as we get into early 2014. I think there'll be a lot of corn, though, that comes to market in early 2014 as farmers start to sell at that point in time.
Compared to previous periods, beef demand is pretty good right now. That's what people are willing to pay for beef. Now, if the economy were to recover, would that go with it? Would they be willing to pay even more?
Yeah, certainly the driver of beef demand is the growth rate of the U.S. economy. We have record high beef prices that consumers face at this point in time. And if the U.S. economy continues to grow, even at the rather modest pace that it has been, I think we can continue to push wholesale beef prices higher. It's going to be a slow process. We're competing against a lot of pork and chicken, but the economic growth will be a mainstay here, I think, as we look ahead, and will give us a little bit stronger prices.
Now, does that mean that consumption is not a concern?
Well, consumption is still a concern. Consumption is half of the demand story. There's the price side of the demand relationships and the consumption side. Per capita consumption in the U.S. is going to go down for beef in 2014 and 15 simply because we're going to produce less beef. But that demand profile, including the price and the consumption, both dimensions, potentially can still show some year-to-year strength.
We've learned the USDA has said there will be no mid-year cattle inventory report in 2014. There wasn't one in 2013 either. What's your estimate as to what we'll see here in January?
On January 1, our largest estimate is a slight decline in the U.S. beef cow herd, and the biggest decline would be about 1%. We're looking for about 0.5% year-to-year decline in the U.S. beef cow herd on January 1, 2014. It's probably really already in the cards. We've seen heifer slaughter and cow slaughter that really get us to that point already.
We've had an issue with beta agonists here over the past few months. Do you think this is a large concern as we go into 2014?
Certainly is an issue for the whole beef industry. This is a cow-calf conference, and even at the cow-calf level, we need to really understand what's going on in the feeding sector and in the meat sector. It's going to feed back very quickly. I think time will tell whether the international marketplace still throws up some more barriers. USDA has already announced, beta agonist free program that can be certified. I think that's a step in the right direction, at least giving that flexibility. But I think the story is still to unfold.
Is it a bigger concern, and this might be a little early to ask, is it a bigger concern for the export market, or is it a bigger concern here at home?
I think at this point in time, it's a bigger concern in the export market. That can be a shock that can happen and preclude exports rather quickly. I think in long-term sense, it's an issue in both to see how consumers are going to perceive those products. And we know that there's we have to look at the quality aspects, what it does to meat quality, and all those dimensions, I think, are still some stories that are still yet to be resolved.
Next week, we'll look at corn and soybean markets with Nick Miller from Stewart Peterson. As I mentioned earlier, if you drive through major corn-producing areas of Nebraska, you're likely to notice a stark contrast between the winter landscape and the yellow grain on the ground. In its November crop report, the USDA estimated the state's corn production at 1.6 billion bushels. As for soybeans, tighter stocks and a large upcoming crop in Brazil could present conflicting selling strategies. With the December crop report next week, we thought it was important to cover grain markets as well in this show. On Thursday afternoon, we talked with John Meuret from J.E. Meuret Grain Company in Brunswick. Crop reports coming out next week. Should we expect anything major?
I don't think so, Jeff. I don't think there's much in there to really move the market. We know we're going to have a big carryout. We know the beans are going to swell a little bit from where they were 2 months ago. But for the most part, no, I don't think we've got anything major coming.
Before we get into maybe some selling strategies on corn and soybeans, update me on what basis numbers look like in this area.
Bases have stayed exceptionally strong through harvest here. We're starting to see a little weakness now, I think, as we wrap up the tail end of harvest. A week ago here, Monday, there's around 1 billion bushel of corn left in the field. And I think that's the corn that's weighing on the market now. But I think, the bin doors are shut and the cold weather is going to set in, and we can maybe firm the cash back up a little bit.
Corn and beans both?
Corn and beans, yep.
All right, let's talk about beans. They found a little bit of momentum here lately. Can it continue?
I think so, Jeff. I mean, you have a real problem because China's, the cheaper we get, or what they think is cheap, the more they buy. So China continues to suck the beans out of the country here, and they've got a really healthy crush margin. So for you and I, there's an inverse. For the China guy, he's happy to keep buying them. So we need to go to a level that stops that or slows it down.
Do you feel we're in a weather rally with South America, or not necessarily?
No, not yet, and that's the scary part. We're not even really in a weather rally. We're more in a demand rally here at the moment. So I think we need to stay tuned. By Christmas, if we don't have a weather rally, then I think we can maybe ease back a little bit.
Where are you as far as being a seller here for this crop?
On the beans here, I think you need to pay attention to these rallies. In 13 or 13.50 cash, you certainly need to let go probably 80% of the soybeans. Next year's crop, I don't know if you want to talk about that, Jeff.
Yeah, let's move into that because it's significantly lower. So how would you go about even trying to price that?
The same time you're pricing the 13 crop, the crop that you put away now, I think you need to look to the 14 crop. And if you can take advantage of some 11 or 11 1/4 cash for next fall, you need to start doing it. One thing's for sure, the total acres don't change next year. There may be some switches between corn and beans, but ultimately, if you're a bull, you better hope for poor weather.
Corn is lower today, as was beans at the close. Where does it find momentum here? I guess the question is, how does it go higher? How does it go lower?
You know, corn's going to be really, really tricky. The one major factor everybody's paying attention to the next 40 days is going to be this fund rebalance. And you've seen the numbers, but they need to buy about 1 billion bushel of corn. The only problem is the farmer needs to sell about 10 billion bushel. And so if we rally and the farmer can stay quiet, you could maybe get 15 or 20 cents. If you rally a little and the farmer lets go of the corn, you're going to just stay in place here and tread water. So I would anticipate we tread water, and I think we leak lower into next year as we see South America's crops start to come off. So.
Is it realistic to say that there's just not enough demand to eat up
There's
all
not
this
enough
corn?
demand, and you can see what China's doing, Jeff. They've rejected 3 cargoes. They've got containers as well that have problems with. It's price negotiation, and I've told a lot of people this week, but it's really hard for people to want to sell more corn to China if they're not paying for what they've already got setting in port. So there's a real nervousness that's reverberated all the way back into Nebraska in this last 10 days. So.
Now on the opposite side of soybeans, corn next year looks strong. How would you go about pricing the 14 crop?
I think there's a carry in the market now. New crop corn next year is a carry from today. And so take advantage of it on these 20 or 30 cent rallies, and you're going to see those and sell it. Same concept as before. If we see anything like normal weather, we've got plenty of corn, we've got plenty of soybeans, and be disciplined. And if inputs are cheaper, you're going to make some money. $4.50 corn and cheaper inputs, I think you've got some profits. So take profit when you see it.
The December crop report is scheduled to be released Tuesday at 11 a.m. Central Time. We continue to learn more about the use of cover crops. In the December Nebraska Farmer, you'll read that turnips and radishes help prevent nitrogen from leaching into groundwater. That's significant for seed corn fields in central Nebraska where nitrate leaching is a big concern. Dean Kroll, a UNL researcher, has found the 2 cover crops pull up excessive nitrogen from those fields and release it for the next crop when they decompose the following spring. You can read more about this cover crop benefit in the December Nebraska Farmer. If you saw the opening of our show, it's apparent in this area that no matter what the calendar says, winter weather is here. At the symposium Wednesday afternoon, we talked with UNL Extension beef cattle reproductive physiologist Rick Funston about nutrition requirements cow producers should keep in mind as conditions become colder.
Well, I think most producers by now have pregnancy checked their cows, and they have to realize that the cows not only need to maintain condition for their own health and well-being, but also the fetus that they're carrying. Fetal growth, the majority of fetal growth occurs in the last trimester of gestation. So I think it's important to monitor body condition score to make sure that those cows get through the winter in good shape, but also that there's no negative impact on the developing fetus.
Let's talk about cattle that are maybe out on stocks. Is there a need to supplement or provide additional energy for those kind of animals?
So in our northern Great Plains or in through the major cow producing states, producers try to decrease production costs by decreasing the amount of harvested feed. So fortunately in Nebraska we have a lot of corn residue, and winter range is also managed for the grazing period of the cow herd so they don't have to feed harvested feed. And on corn residue, we just completed a study that shows very little benefit of supplementation while that cow's grazing, provided their appropriate stocking rate.
Benefit to the cow or to the calf?
So actually to both, very little benefit to either. If they're appropriate, again, always understand the stocking rate is proportionate to the bushel yield of the corn. We have some information on our beef.unl.edu website on what that would be based on bushel yield. So we haven't seen a benefit of supplementation even to changing body condition score on corn residue, provided it's available. As part of our fetal programming work, we've also looked at, did it impact those calves that weren't even born yet by supplementing or not supplementing? And the only things we've seen an impact of in the case of the steer calves is slightly lower quality grade marbling and a slightly lower heifer fertility from the cows that weren't supplemented. Now winter range is a different story. Those cows benefit from protein supplementation, like a pound of a 30% protein, and they respond both in body weight and body condition change to supplementation, and also those steers born to cows that aren't supplemented or have lighter carcass weight, lower marbling scores, and the heifer fertility is lower.
We might be approaching the time where some cow producers might be buying back some replacement heifers or buying replacement heifers to try and build up the herd again. Is there anything you want to note with bringing those cows back into your herd?
So both, probably some people are purchasing outside replacement females, but also retaining more of their own because they may be down because of selling out and during the drought, and maybe they have better forage supplies.
Sure.
The big issue is we still have really high feed costs. And what approach we've taken with our research is to look at that heifer as a yearling enterprise and retain more females than are needed for replacements and run them through kind of similar to a cow, graze winter range or corn residue with about the same supplementation rate, a pound of a 30% protein, which could come in many different forms. And then those heifers would be somewhat green, I guess, coming into the breeding season. We probably want to increase their nutrition plain a little bit before breeding, but probably not over a pound and a quarter, pound and a half a day. A lot of people will synchronize an AI, and we want those heifers in a gaining plane in nutrition, but not too much, I think is key, because of how they will respond while they're trying to establish pregnancy. And those heifers, what we've seen is a lot of times people pay a lot of attention to getting a heifer to their breeding target weight, for example, but then they forget about what their response might be when they go to grass, when they are trying to establish pregnancy. And research that we have has shown that that period of early embryonic development, as perceived by plane of nutrition gain, if you will, is very important to pregnancy rate.
We'll have more from this symposium in later episodes, including our discussion on beef trade with Greg Dowd from Commodity Markets Council. In early October, a blizzard moved across a multi-state region, including northwest Nebraska. That storm had a devastating impact for many livestock producers who lost significant percentages of their animals. As we made our way here Monday, we stopped near Chadron to talk with Scott Cotton, a UNL Extension educator in Dawes County. While we know this area of South Dakota saw incredible loss totals as well, for the purpose of this interview, we'll focus only on Nebraska. The affected region, like many in the Midwest, suffered through a seemingly never-ending drought, but was also impacted by wildfires last year that took out grasses and fence line. And now, with more than 3,000 head of livestock killed from the October storm, there's no help from a livestock indemnity program, since that wasn't continued along with the latest Farm Bill extension. As sobering as it is to hear about the damage, it can't compare to the reality of living every day with the results.
Since the storm, the last 2 weeks is fairly stable. We have recorded 3,086 head of livestock lost, and we estimate that there's another 200 to 400 that are not reported yet. Folks are waiting to see what the new Farm Bill may offer. They don't see a lot of point in reporting stuff if there's no opportunity to get help.
What's the process been for disposing of the carcasses in this area?
The producers initially are responsible for all of it. The USDA has set aside some money through the NRCS EQIP funds to help them dispose of livestock in locations that it might threaten watersheds and the environment. And the producers have aggressively taken care of their dead and their injured. In fact, if you drive across the landscape, you won't see many of them left. There are a few, but compared to the 2 weeks after the storm, where you could drive almost anywhere in this area and see livestock laying, it's greatly improved. But it's undertaken a great effort by the producers and a great cost.
What help has come in since this hit more than a few weeks ago? What help has come in from outside of this area to producers here?
We've had a number of sale yards that have held revolving heifer sales where they'd sell the same heifer over and over, and people would donate that money to the Cattlemen's Relief Fund. The fund, which was set up under the Chadron Community Foundation, has set aside money where people can apply for it or be nominated for it. And those funds are to help them with burial costs, with immediate family needs, with emergency medical needs for both family and for the livestock.
How serious are the financial needs here? I mean, for a person that doesn't know this industry and doesn't know this area, can you just kind of extrapolate what that means?
The direct cost of livestock loss is somewhere between $5 and $6 million. The projected cost for the lost calf and lamb crop for next year is about a 1.5 million loss for the next year. To regain those herds to an operational level will take 3 to 4 years. And the impact to superstructure, to the trees and the power lines is several million. On top of all of that, you have to add the cost of disposing of livestock, which we feel is over $1 million already. And you're talking about a population that's really only 200 families.
To those 200 families, what's the cost? I mean, what are they all up against right now?
Most of these families that have been impacted are probably looking at, probably $250,000 to $500,000 per family.
Have banks been willing to rework loans or make some ground in between to try and help out?
I believe the bankers are doing everything they could. We haven't talked to them recently. They do have some limitations in what flexibility they have, because often as not, the operating loans for these cattlemen were the chattel, or the collateral per se, was the cattle, which are now, a lot of them are gone. So there's limited options, but I think the bankers are trying to work options and meeting with families aggressively, to say the very least, to try to find options.
You've had a terrible string of circumstances really here. You've had a multi-year drought, there have been wildfires in this area, and now this snowstorm that's really decimated the cattle population. What does it mean overall for the landscape of agriculture in this part of the state?
About 91% of the agriculture in this northwestern part of the state, north of the Niobrara River, is driven by range cow-calf operations. Of that 90% of the economics in our communities, probably we're down to about 38% of our normal earning power.
What about any opportunities for extra income for some of these producers? Are there any ways to make a little extra money in the meantime?
There is. We have some opportunities in this area that you don't have everywhere. Some for tourism because of the historic and the scenic area around us. Some for leasing cattle out if we get the fences back up. Those that we do have individuals that still have about 600 and some miles of fences down from the fires. Once they get those up, they could at least reestablish possibly part of their cash flow by leasing their grass out next year to other people. And there is a huge opportunity here, because when a system's disturbed, it provides openings. And we've been looking for openings where ranchers felt the need to bring in young producers to help them. They have the need now. We're hoping that they embrace that need and bring young people on board. What's the catch? The catch is that if you're a young producer and you want to get into business, taking a percentage of the herd isn't a good idea right now. It's going to have to be some other kind of system.
You're part of an emergency network. Have you been able to gain any positives from this storm in terms of what you can maybe learn from it to use in the future?
Through the Extension Disaster Education Network, we'd worked a number of these large blizzards around the United States since the early 90s, and we used those resources and that response protocol to get help here as fast as we could. At the same time, each lesson that you learn from a disaster serves as a guideline on what not to do and what to do if disasters happen to other places. So we have a system across the country where other extension specialists know who's been through this type of system before and would call them for advice or support or even responding to the area.
Now with this week's weather forecast, here's UNL Extension State Climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. Of course, the big news was the brutal Arctic air mass that moved into our region. Last week when we put the forecast together, of course, we did this right before Thanksgiving and put the forecast together. The models were indicating the cold front would come through in the Wednesday-Thursday time frame. It actually moved forward about 24 hours. The net result was same thing, very cold temperatures. And we did see some significant accumulations of snowfall, particularly in western Cherry County and most of the Panhandle. The best snowfall totals I've seen so far, between 10 to 14 inches up in the northwestern corner of Cherry County, 5 to 7 inches broad-based coverage across a good portion of the Panhandle. And of course, we've seen some sub-zero lows and highs that were hard-pressed to make it out of the single digits in a few of the regions of extreme northwestern Nebraska. Now, as we go through this next 7 days, we're going to start to see the cold air ease up, but we're going to have to wait till about next Wednesday. In the meantime, we do have a system going to push some energy out into the Central Plains that may generate some snowfall and accumulating snowfall for portions of the state that have been missing out on the vast majority of these big snow events. That would be south central to east central Nebraska and portions of extreme southeastern Nebraska, where most of the precipitation of this last event was in the form of freezing precipitation. So let's take a look at the upper models and see how things will progress. The thing I'll draw your attention to is the cold air is firmly in place. Now we have this trough moving out. So for today, we are expecting increasing cloudiness as the day progresses and some light snow breaking out in the evening hours across the Panhandle. And that will start to move its way across the state, particularly as we get into tomorrow as the system rapidly moves out. Looks like the best precipitation is going to be south central through central Nebraska and points to the southeast. Liquid equivalent precipitation is about 1/10 of an inch to 2/10 of an inch on this forecast. That means a 20-to-1 snow ratio, which we are expecting, would generate anywhere from 2 to up to 5 inches of snowfall. If it lifts a little bit farther north, snowfall totals could get a little bit more significant. Now that system will rapidly move toward the Great Lakes, and the precipitation will start to come to an end on Monday, but we still may see some flurries or some very light snowfall, but no significant accumulations are expected. Very cold temperatures coming in. We'll be looking at highs across northern Nebraska that will just barely make it out of the single digits. Now as we get into Tuesday, system moves to the Great Lakes. We still get a northwest flow, but we'll start to see a moderation of temperatures. The highs will start making it up to the mid-teens, and in western Nebraska, we're actually going to get up into the 20s. As we get into Wednesday, that system departs the Great Lakes. We start to see some type of zonal flow. We might get some Chinooks developing in western Nebraska that will bring our temperatures above the freezing mark. And by the time we get to Thursday, certainly the Chinook factor may come into play and we'll be easily into the 40s. And if it gets really strong, we could actually make it up into the upper 40s. The coldest temperature will be in northeastern Nebraska, where we'll be fighting to get to the 32-degree mark. On Friday, big zonal flow. It looks like everybody should share into the warmth. Now, as we look at the forecast going forward, it looks like the best chance of snow is this weekend, and as we move through the week, we'll start progressing gradually warmer. We look to the 8 to 14-day forecast. After next Saturday, another cold batch comes in, keeping us below normal in terms of precipitation. Another big storm system enters the picture, but we will drier than normal here, at least in most of Nebraska.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews with Jim Robb, John Meuret, Rick Funston, and Scott Cotton are available individually on the Market Journal website and through our mobile app as part of the December 6th episode. Next week, we'll report from the 2013 Nebraska Power Farming Show at the Lancaster Event Center in Lincoln. If you plan on attending, you can find the Market Journal booth in Pavilion 3. Just look for the crowd of adoring and/or angry fans. Until then, thanks for watching. From the Range Beef Cow Symposium in Rapid City, I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.